Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yevamot Kuf Bet. Today's daf is sponsored in honor of the inimitable Phyllis Hecht, whose spirit of determination through challenges inspires us all. Stay well, dear friend, with love from the Hadran Zoom family. Okay, we're now going to get started with our daf. We ended in the middle of quite a big issue, I would say, a complicated issue about the status of converts when it comes to being judges. Okay, so we saw that Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda made this statement that you can't do chalitza in a beit din shel gerim. Okay, so now, right, and they even asked him to be part, which is kind of funny. They asked him and they said, "What are you talking about? I'm a ger, I can't be here." So now I'm a Rava. We're going to learn a little bit more about this and talk a little bit about some practical ramifications of this. Ger dan et chavero dvar Torah. A ger can judge a fellow convert. Okay, so a convert can be a judge in a case of conversion. Well, not a case, we'll get to that. That's a separate thing. But a case dealing with a convert. Now, Rashi says, what are we talking about here? Rashi says we're clearly discussing here dinei nefashot. It means to be a judge in a court ruling on someone's death. Okay, like the capital punishment issue. Why? Well, he points out that this whole thing about a ger not functioning as a judge contradicts the sugya somewhere else. If you're talking about financial issues, he can do it for anybody. How do we know this? Because it says, Ditnan, a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, explicit Mishnah. Everyone can be a judge on monetary issues. And the Gemara there says hakol. What does hakol mean? Remember, we've had hakol chayavim b're'iyah and then except for blah, 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 blah. So hakol doesn't always mean everybody. Women can't be judges, for example. Comes to include a convert. So there you see, clear Gemara, convert can be a judge. So Rashi says we must be talking here about capital punishment. Now, what's interesting is there's other things besides monetary and capital punishment. There's things in between, which aren't so clear from Rashi what he means. Rashi has the most lenient opinion. Not everybody understands this way. Some people say a ger can't do monetary issues, and then they have to explain the sugya in Sanhedrin a little different. There's many different opinions. It's actually a pretty controversial issue. What issues can a ger be? More on that after we get through this section, because I want you to see it inside first. Where does it come from? Okay, in fact, it was the first question when I opened the Zoom. Somebody asked, right, where does this come from? And how could this be? Aren't we supposed to treat when someone converts? They're Jews. It's 100%. Well, here we have it. Now, what this is really proving is, how do we know that he can? Oh, so yeah, by the way, I see. Okay, I didn't see your question, but I thought about this as well. How could he be called Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda if his father, if he converted, you're usually called Ben Avraham. So he and his father converted, they say, and therefore he was called in his father's name, even though we know Katan Shnolad. I also thought about that question and looked it up. Okay, in any case, what happens here? We want to know how we know that he can judge a fellow convert, even though he can't judge a Jew. We're going to learn this off from the Psukim about a king. Som tasim alecha melech, asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo, mikerav achecha tasim alecha melech. It says you have to have a king from among your brothers. Now, by the way, you might know the laws in America. For example, if you want to be the president of the United States, you have to be a native-born American. Okay, so this is very similar, by the way. Okay, so if you think this is a crazy idea, right? In America, a free country, people come from all over the place, everyone's equal, but yet when it comes to the president's role, we want that to be a native-born American, right? So you can understand the concept of maybe, again, it's difficult. I'm just trying to put it into a context that maybe is understandable. So now this, notice what it says. So mikerav is clear. It means those born as Jews. But it says, tasim alecha melech. On you, you means the regular Jewish people, not the converts. So, aval ger danit chavero gel. From there you learn that specifically for ruling for Jews, but ruling for fellow converts, yes. Yisrael, dan afilu Yisrael. If his mother was Jewish, then he can even judge Yisrael. Now, this is a little bit strange. What do you mean if his mother's Jewish? If his mother's Jewish, he's Jewish. That's not a convert. So some people say the simple reading is, if his father's not Jewish, then that also puts him in a little bit of a different category. And we're going to see that in another minute. But for this purpose, right, then he can even judge the Israel when it comes to dinei nefashot. But, right, that's capital punishment. Ulinyan chalitza, but specifically for chalitza, he has to have both a Jewish father and a Jewish mother. Now, this is interesting because we never distinguish in halacha really between if your father's not Jewish or not, although it does come up a little bit here and there, but it's very rare. So that's just interesting in and of itself. I will point out that there are some who understand this case to be like the case of exactly what you're saying, Gita, where the mother converted while she was pregnant. That's why. Then it's a little different because we had this whole thing, right? If he was conceived, she was not Jewish, maybe then his status is a little different. Okay, so what we see here are different gradations. Why do I want to bring this up? I want to bring up something very relevant. The Young Israel a number of years ago came out and said, no, melech is the law, what we call of srara. And how do they get from melech to judge? First of all, some people say Rashi says dinei nefashot because the king has the power to do capital punishment, and that's why dinei nefashot. But really, a king is a role of srara, of having rule over people. So the Young Israel came out a number of years ago with a ruling, both about women and about converts, that they can't function as presidents of shuls. This comes from here, okay? And it's a crazy ruling, okay? I won't exactly say where I side on this issue, although it might be kind of clear, but, right, it's a very big question. Is that srara, being the head of a shul, right? The president of a shul, is that a law of srara, a ruling? You're not really ruling over people. It's a little bit extreme, but it's, my feeling is there's very little that's srara in our day, right? The question is, it's also, by the way, the question about rabbis, srara, and can women be rabbis? Part of the issue. Only part of the issue is this issue of srara. And the question is really, what does srara mean, right? They certainly don't have, most people know that rabbis don't have a lot of power anyway, but, right, do they have power like a king? It's a very good question, okay? So anyway, this is a big debate. And again, whether that's their only consideration, I'm sure there's other considerations as well, particularly the women's issue. And the convert issue, I think it really seems to be coming from here, this concern again, but the whole question is srara. What is srara? Srara is with a sin, by the way, like from salve, like an officer. So anyway, this is a very big issue and very, very right. So thank you for helping me out, Ruth. The word authority would be a good word, right? It's having authority over people. So again, how you define it is exactly the question. And then to what does it apply? It's a very fascinating topic. So, and again, the other thing to point out here is there's a lot of different opinions in the Rishonim about how far do we take this? Where do we draw the lines? What things converts yes, what things no, even within judges. Okay, so there's a minimalist approach, a maximalist approach, as often is in these things. It's a good example of a sugya where they're not exactly clear about all the lines, and therefore it's open to interpretation. And it is a very relevant issue. Amar Rabba, Amar Rav Kahane, Amar Rav. Im yavo Eliyahu v'yomar. Okay, now we're on a totally different topic. If Eliyahu, we're now going to talk about shoes. What kind of shoes are used for chalitza? I'll point out right now that I'll just mention that yesterday on our site, on the Hadron site, we put up a very interesting shiur from Web Yeshiva. We're now dealing with the actual chalitza. So we put up this shiur that was given a number of months ago, or a month or two ago, about chalitza, and it's from Rabbi Gideon Rothstein. And he interviews a woman who actually went through chalitza at around minute 10. She starts to speak and she gives a whole description of what the chalitza ceremony was like for her, right? We're now really into it. And it's a very moving shiur. In fact, I was thinking of bringing a woman to speak and I realized they did it and they did a great job. So we may as well use their shiur, and it's there. You can see it. If you get our links, then it was sent out yesterday. If you're in our WhatsApp groups, not and you want to join, you can join. In any case, definite listen to. So now we're going to talk about what kind of shoe you can use. So the question is sandal, shoe, what's more ideal? In the Torah, it says na'al. Now, normally we translate na'al as a shoe, but we're going to see right away that according to our sugya, and I will tell you now that the Yerushalmi has the opposite approach, which is fascinating because, again, this is based in what people saw and what people saw was practiced. So you could see in Babylonia and in Israel, there must have been a bit of a difference as to what the typical practice was. So our sugya is going to assume, I'll already preface it by saying, our sugya is going to assume sandal is ideal, shoe is less ideal, or potentially there's going to be a machloket. Is a shoe ideal or is a shoe not ideal, but if you do it, it's okay. In the Yerushalmi, it's the opposite. The shoe is obviously the right thing, and the sandal is the one that there's a bit of a debate about. So all very interesting. We're going to learn our sugya because we're in the Bavli, but it's important to note that the Yerushalmi has a different approach. Amar Rav Kahane, Amar Rav. So we're now going to have Rabba saying in the name of Rav Kahane, who's saying in the name of Rav, and then we're going to have Rav Yosef, who says in the name of Rabba, in the name of Rav Kahane, in the name of Rav. It says Rav is first generation, Rav Kahane is second generation, Rabba and Rav Yosef are third generation. Right? They're the teachers of Abaye and Rabba who are fourth generation. Try to say these things every once in a while. Eventually, you'll get it clear. So Rabba says in the name of Rav Kahane, in the name of Rav, Im Yavo Eliyahu. If Eliyahu were to come in to say, now if you're saying if Eliyahu were to come and say, this is the halacha, we're obviously saying this would be a change from what existed, okay? Meaning, this isn't what happens now, but if he says this change, we can believe him, as opposed to if he says some other change, we don't believe him. If he says you can do chalitza with a shoe, we can believe him. Which means what? Okay, we're going to see this inside, but let me already tell you, that means you can't really do chalitza with a shoe. It's less than ideal, but if he says it's ideal, okay, we can turn it into ideal. If he tells you you can't use a sandal for this, we don't believe him. By the way, I'll already tell you now what's the difference between a sandal and a shoe besides what we think of a sandal and shoe. But it's very hard to understand these sugyas because it's dealing with the reality of what their shoes look like, what their materials. We don't know all these things. But it seems to be that the shoe was made of a softer leather, and we'll see this later, and the sandal was made of a harder leather. And yes, Gita, what you're saying is exactly what I said before, which is the Bavli Yerushalmi difference, maybe I wasn't clear, so I'll say it clearly, could be a difference of what was commonly practiced by then, what shoes they wore, what, right? It's very much affected, I imagine, by what was going on, whether it was affected by what shoes people wore in general, or maybe just what the practice became for chalitza. And then when you see what's customary, then your questions are based on what you see in reality. So I'm sure that that's what the difference is from, or potentially, I don't know for sure. So now they say, why do you not listen to him if he says you can't use a sandal? Because this is the common practice. Everybody uses sandals, so it can't possibly be that he could come along and tell you we can't do this. This, by the way, is interesting in terms of custom overriding halacha. If someone comes and tells you the halacha is like this, and the common practice is not to do that, practice can sometimes override halacha, or at least it's not exactly a halacha here, but it's Eliyahu tells you this is the halacha, we won't accept. The Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rav Kahane, Amar Rav, Im Yavo Eliyahu, he's going to say the opposite of the first part. The second part is going to be the same. First part's the opposite. If Eliyahu comes and says, Ein choltzim b'min'al shom'in lo. If he tells you you can't do chalitza with a shoe, you can believe him. Now, this must mean, according to him, it's ideal to use a shoe. If Eliyahu changes that, well, then we can believe him, and then it won't be ideal anymore. So again, what's going to be concluded here is each one holds it's the opposite of what they say, because if Eliyahu has to come in and change something that already exists. So if he says, Ein chotzim sandal, ein shomim lo. But like the first person, right? But if he says, don't do chalitza with a sandal, we don't believe him. Shekvar naguam b'sandal. So my benai, what's the difference between them? Okay, the difference is, as I already told you, can you use a shoe ideally? Okay, so Rabba, who says, if he comes and tells you you can do chalitza with a sandal, thinks that now it's not ideal. Okay, but maybe it could be ideal. Eliyahu theoretically can make it ideal, but right now it's not ideal. Rav Yosef starts on the premise that now it is ideal. If Eliyahu tells you it's less than ideal, okay, so we can change it. But right now he thinks it's ideal. So the first thing is to show that there's a machloka between amoraim. Now we're going to show that's actually a machloka between tannaim. Okay, so first, before we get there though, so first we're going to prove it from our Mishnah. The one who says even lechatchila going to have a bit of a problem. Because if you remember when I read the Mishnah reads as if it's less than ideal. Doesn't it say in our Mishnah? If you do chalitza with a shoe, it's okay. It works. But that language is a language of what we call b'diavad. It means if you do this, it works, is less than ideal. It doesn't mean this is how you should do it. So diavad in lechatchila lo. It sounds like only b'diavad, only post facto, but not lechatchila, not ab initio. So the Gemara says, no, huadin dafilo lechatchila. No, you can read that line as lechatchila. It is ideal. V'ayde dibaylim in a seifa, anpalia chalitza psula, afilu diavad, tannaim miresha diavad. Okay, so they say, since the next case or later on it says anpalia doesn't work even if you do it, right? It doesn't even work post facto. So therefore, in the Resha, they use the same type of wording. It's just a literary thing. It has nothing to do with even ideally you can use a shoe, and therefore we've explained this in two ways. Now they say min al chatchila tanai. It's actually machloket tannaim, and we're going to hear a story here. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, "Pam achat halachti lenitzivin." I went to Nitzivin. Matzat zaken echad. I saw an elderly man. Amarti lo kluma tabaki v'Rabbi Yehuda bebeter. Do you know him? Did you have what to do with him? Amar li hein. Yes. Bal shulchani hu tadir. He always ate over my house. Klum ra'ita shechalatz yevama. Did you ever see him do chalitza? Amar li ra'ita shechalatz harbe pamim. Now, obviously, it doesn't mean he did chalitza. It means that's when we say a rabbi married someone, right? He didn't marry that. Right? He performed, he officiated at a chalitza ceremony. So he asked him, bimin al or sandal, with a shoe or with a sandal. Amar li, right? You can imagine this guy probably never saw a chalitza ceremony. He wanted to know, right? It's not so common. He said, even though it's interesting that Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera did a lot of them. He says, you can't use a shoe for, why are you asking me, did he use a sandal or a shoe? You can't use a shoe. Amarti lo. So I said to him, Im ken, what are you talking about? You can't use a shoe. Why did Rabbi Meir say if you do it, it works? Now, Rabbi Meir's language sounds like b'diavad. If you did it, it works, but not ideally. And Rabbi Yaakov Omer Mishmo, Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rabbi Meir, you can even do it ideally. So what do you see here? We have a debate. Two versions of what Rabbi Meir said. Forget about the Zaken who thought you couldn't do it. That was just probably a mistake. But we now have two versions of Rabbi Meir, which is a machloket between tannaim about what Rabbi Meir held. Did he say ideally or did he say only it's less than ideal, but you can do it? My time. And now we have to get to, well, what's wrong with the shoe, right? This whole time you're probably wondering. Shoe seems pretty clear. It says in the Torah, na'al. Na'al means shoe. What's the issue with the shoe? So, if you're going to say that we have the bottom of the shoe, the sole of the shoe, and then we have the part on top of it, like the part that covers your foot, and that's kind of above, or the straps that are considered above, and then you're already removing something me'al de me'al, and the way the shoe works would be more like removing two layers almost, right? It says she takes the shoe off from his foot. That means it has to be above his foot, but not above something above the foot. And maybe that's the issue. Well, then it wouldn't even work post facto. Wouldn't be good at all. That can't be the issue. So to which they say, they offer two suggestions. Look, which is not exactly clear what it means. Okay, we'll go with Rashi. Rashi says it's karua milamala. It's torn at the top. Okay, so again, I told you before that a sandal is made of hard leather. Hard leather doesn't tear, but soft leather could tear. So they don't want you to use a shoe. Again, gezerah, it's actually an interesting use of gezerah. Gezerah usually means we forbid something. Here it's not that we're forbidding it. We're just saying don't use it in ideal circumstances unless you have no choice. So why? Because it might tear. And if it tears, then it's not going to cover the majority of his foot, and that will be a problem. Now, again, it's hard to understand. In our day, the sandal often covers less than half your foot, or could, right? Depending on what kind of sandal you wear. In those days, it seems like the shoe maybe covered less than half the foot, and therefore it would be a problem that you might have half a shoe, and that would be an issue. Amarav, more about this shoe that they use, or sandal. Had I not seen my uncle, who was Rabbi Chia, he often quotes his uncle, had I not seen my uncle Rabbi Chia, the chalatz sandal shinsin, they did chalitza in a shoe that had laces, Okay. And what we mean here, laces, and if you've ever seen a chalitza shoe, and if you haven't, you should go look it up. It has these straps, more like straps than laces. Okay. If I hadn't seen him who had these straps, now obviously if you have a shoe with straps, it means that the shoe isn't so firmly on your foot, because without the straps, it will fall off. So Anna lo have chalitza sandal detaya de mehadik tfei. I would have thought that you need a shoe that's very firmly on the foot, fits very well in the foot, that doesn't need any straps, and it's an Arab shoe. Taya are Arabs, and it's the people who wander around basically in their day. And I would have thought that's the best kind of shoe, because again, what is the issue here? She needs to take the shoe off his foot. We're going to see this a lot today. And if it falls off, it's loose, right? It comes off on its own, it's a problem. So I would have thought you need a very firmly attached shoe and not with straps. But had I not seen my uncle, he started, right? But clearly you have to use these straps because that's how my uncle did it. And our kind of shoe, forget about the Arab shoe that we don't necessarily use, but our shoe, even though the shoes that we use, it has chumrata. So what's chumrata? Again, every time you have these words, it's not exactly clear what they mean. Rashi explains it's a kesher kashur al sfatav, umamido shelo yitzeh min harega. Has some tie at the top that fastens it into place. Katrina bemitana, we add more, we tie on more straps. Okay, this is why a chalitza shoe has these straps going all the way up to the knee almost. Okay, it comes from here. This is where we get it from. We want her to really take the shoe off. So she unties the straps, she undoes the straps, undoes the shoe. We want a whole procedure here. So if it didn't have that, right, it might be on firmly, but that's not enough. We want to add to that. Now we just have a siman. For the next three things are going to be hatarat, yevama, sandal. Okay, now we're going to read them inside. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar hatarat yevama l'shuk b'shmitat rov ha'akev. Rav says that the way you permit a woman to marry someone else, meaning you have a successful chalitza ceremony, is by taking a shoe off the majority of the heel. To which the Gemara says, Meitive. Wait, the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav seems to have a problem. Because it says in another source, "Hutru ritzuot min al v'sandal." If they untie on their own, okay, they loosen up. Oh, sheshamat rov haregel, or the yabam himself took off the shoe off of most of his leg. Chalitzata, or most of his foot. Chalitzata psula, it doesn't work. Now, this isn't really talking about our topic, but let's focus on the words. What does it seem to indicate? If he took it off rov harega, so tama de shamatu, hasham tahi, chalitzata kshera. Sounds like if he takes it off most of his foot, it's a problem. She takes it off most of his foot, it's good. Now, what did we just say? All she needs to do is take it off most of his ankle, not his foot. So, right, the majority of your ankle is not the majority of your foot. So, rov haregel im, rov ha'akev lo. It seems to say most of your ankle or your heel, however we call it. No. So they say, lo, hainu rov haregel, hainu rov ha'akev. It's the same thing. V'amai kara lehu rov haregel. Why do they call it the majority of the leg? De kula chayle de kara alei dachis. All the pressure is on the heel, basically. So that's why they said the heel and not the foot. Okay, but it really means the same thing. Now that we brought this braita that we just said, if he does it or it comes up on its own, it's no good. This supports what Rabbi Yana said. What did Rabbi Yana say? Rabbi Yana is an amoraim from Eretz Israel. That's why he's a rabbi, but not a Tana. So Rabbi Yana said, if he untied it, but she took it off, or or she untied it, he took it off, that doesn't work. We're getting all the details of the ceremony. She has to untie it, she has to take it off. By Rabbi Yana, now we're going to have classic Gemara questions with classic Gemara answers. We don't know. Okay, what if she tore it off of him? Okay, she tore the shoe or she burnt the shoe. How does she do that? She puts a hot coal on it and it basically, dissipates. But so the question is, is it just to reveal his foot? Is the goal, is the ch.l.tz, as we say? Is it the action or the reaction, right? What happens as a result? Is it the result that's important? So is it that we want to reveal the regel, the foot, and she's done that? Or is it the action that's important of removing the shoe? And she hasn't done the action of removing the shoe by tearing it or burning it. Take it. No answer. Another question we're not going to have an answer to. Kind of funny question. Two shoes, one on top of the other. Okay, you're going to be happy. The Gemara is going to ask, is this a real situation, right? The way we like to ask, what are they talking about? The Gemara is actually going to ask it and actually prove that it is, which is going to be even funnier. So two shoes, one on top of the other. What's the halacha hechidam? So first they say, well, what are you talking about? Like, what do you do with these two shoes? So if you take off the top shoe and leave the bottom shoe on, for sure that's not going to work. Because this is what we keep saying. It has to be from off your foot. This doesn't work from off your foot. Okay, I see you're asking. I'm glad you asked this, Becky, because I wanted to mention this. There's a debate about whether you could be wearing socks or not, because it has to be from off your foot. Do socks, are they considered a barrier to your foot? Or no, socks are soft and they're not shoes and they're not considered a barrier at all. So I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to mention it. I don't always remember all the things I want to mention. So that's an interesting debate and it's not clear as usual. So that's clearly not the question. If she tears the top one, pulls off the other one, but the top one is still there. Okay, it's just torn. And after tearing it, she's able to remove the one underneath. So she got the one that's me'al raglo, but what's the problem? The leg is still covered because the shoe is on, right? So the Eli is still there. It's just torn. Ma chalitza b'inav ha'ika. Do we say she needs to just remove the shoe that's on his foot? And she did that. Or does she just need to, right, have, or do we say, right, she did take off the shoe, or do we say, no, she needs the leg revealed, and that's not revealed. Okay, the leg. So now the Gemara asks her question, starting now on Amabet. Does anybody really wear two pairs of shoes? Yes, in fact, they do. We saw Rabbi Yehuda, he went out into the shuk with 5 pairs of slippers, kind of slippers or something like that, one on top of the other. It's not the first time we've had a reference to caps for sale in the Gemara, but again, it sounds like caps for sale, right? With wearing shoes one on top of the other. I don't know if he was selling them and that's why he went out like that, or for whatever reason, right? Now, like people like walking out in slippers to, on the street. Maybe for some reason he wore 5 to protect his foot better. Anyway, yes, this sometimes happens. Another halacha, Rav Yehuda is passing down the name of Rav. This is a very interesting one. They always talk about the story of the kids that were playing with the bottle, with the cap of the soda can, and he put the it's like a ring, he put it on her and said, around and are they married or not? So now we have a chalitza story like that, or a chalitza situation. It's not a story here, but it's a situation. So now we say here, yevama shehigdila ben ha'achim muteret linaseh le'echa min ha'achim. Let's say we have a young yevama. Okay, she's young when her husband dies. She's not really of age yet so much. So she hangs out with and she's living in the family of her husband's family. So she's around the brothers a lot. What if, now, let's just go back and review some halachot. If you do chalitza with one of the brothers, what does that mean? You can't do yibum with any of the other brothers and not with him because he was lo boneh, lo yivneh, and therefore he can't, because it says it in the future, even though it's really talking about the past, they say it means in the future he can no longer be boneh, neither can anyone else. So now, if she grew up among them, muteret linaseh le'echa min ha'achim, she can marry any of them. Ve'en choshishin shema chatzas sandal le'echa mehem. We don't have to worry that maybe one day she took off one of their shoes, right? You imagine they came back from whatever, and he's tired, and he said, "Can you take my shoe off for me?" Okay. What if she took off his shoe? Would she? Right? So you don't have to worry that maybe that happened. Again, what would this mean? That maybe it happened, and then she's not allowed to do yibum with any of the brothers or him. So now, listen to the language. You don't have to worry that maybe this happened. To which the Gemara says, well, it sounds like Tama de lo chasina. It's saying you didn't see this happen, and you don't have to worry that it might have happened and you just didn't notice. But ha-chazina cheshina sounds like if you did see her do this, then it would be a problem. Now, how could you say that? V'ha'tanya, doesn't it say in a braita, exactly as I see you writing in the chat, bein nitkavenhu v'lo nitkavnahi, bein shenitkavnahi v'lo nitkavenhu. Even if, right, whether he had kavana and she didn't, or she had kavana, he didn't, Chalitza tapsula, it doesn't work. For chalitza, they both need intent. Okay, that's a mitzvah that must happen with intent. So why would this be worded in the language that seems to indicate you don't have to worry about maybe it happened, which sounds like if it did, it would be a problem. What are you talking about? It's not a problem because you need intent. There was no intent here. So they say, okay, hachi kamar, this is what they need. Even if you saw it happen, you don't have to worry that they had intent to do chalitza when she took off his shoe. That's the issue. That's the first reading, which makes a lot of sense. But the second reading is going to be more interesting. Amre, different way of reading the sugya. There's a different version. Tama de lo chazinan. Ha chazinan chosheshin. We are concerned. If we saw her take off the shoe, she can't do yibam with any of the brothers. Ude kavtana by kavana. What about this kavana issue? So now they distinguish. There's two elements of chalitza. One is that if you do chalitza, we talked about, she's forbidden now to all the brothers. The other thing is the main thing of chalitza, which it permits her to marry anybody else. So to which they split between these two things. They say, Hani, when you need kavana, that's the ishtavuya la'alma. To have a proper chalitza that permits her to go marry somebody else, that has to have intent. But la'achim mifsala, but to be strict, right? It's the lenient and strict, right? We're not going to allow her to marry. We're going to be strict with her on that issue until we have a proper chalitza with intent. But in order to say we're going to forbid you to marry one of the brothers, that already we're going to do, even if you just took off his shoe one day, even if you didn't have intent, that's enough of an action. So I find this very interesting, right? Just having taken off his shoe one day could theoretically be presumed to be chalitza, at least l'chumra, right? So we call it chalitza l'chumra. Just like in that case of the marriage that we're playing around, but we call it a marriage l'chumra, right? Like we're going to treat it as if we're not going to permit them to sleep with each other. No, they're not married halachically, but yes, there is. Anyway, it's just kiddushin. But in any case, we're going to treat it as marriage l'chumra. He seems to have a lot to say today. Sandal tafol b'pishtan en chotzim. If it's sewn with, instead of leather, with flax, no good. Shne'emal va'analech tachash. Calls it a na'al in our pasuk, and there's a pasuk about a na'al in Yechezkel, and it calls it a na'al of tachash. You might remember tachash from the Mishkan, orot chashim adamim. Okay, that it's an animal. The Koran says it's a narwhal, and I think there's different opinions quoted there. I now don't remember all of it, but it's a kind of animal. So now they say, okay, well, if analech is tachash, then wouldn't you say ema tachash imid yachrina lo? Maybe all shoes have to be specifically from tachash. So they say no, na'al riba, because it says na'al more than once in that section. Say it means any kind of shoe made from an animal. To which the Gemara obviously says, okay, well, if you're going to have shoe comes to include more than just tachash. It should be even made of flax. And once you're saying we're going to include more than just the tachash, why are you including only animals and not anything else? To which they say, well, then why'd you say tachash? Tachash must be to say something like tachash. It doesn't have to be specifically from tachash, but something like it. Rabbi Elazar Merav. So Rabbi Elazar asked Rav, who shall utarsiotav shall say Rav must have been the expert in this field because he has a lot to say and they're asking him questions as well. So Rabbi Elazar asked him, it's interesting because Rabbi Elazar is in Israel and Rav, maybe it was when Rav was still in Israel before he went to Babel, or maybe later. Anyway, he asked him if the shoe is leather, but the straps are made of goat's hair. Okay, does that work? Milo krina beva and alech tachash. Isn't this called the na'al is tachash? And also what he's saying is it's from an animal as well. The hairs, to which they say, well, then you can make the whole thing of goat hairs, the shoe, and it should be fine. Because if it's all you need is from an animal, why then leather? To which he answers, that's called something more like a slipper or something that's not a shoe. Okay, something made of goat hairs, right, is not considered a shoe, and therefore it doesn't count. Amrle Rav Kahane l'Shmuel. I'm glad Shmuel got some coverage on this page. Rav was kind of taking over. We now get into a whole discussion. How do you know that chalitza is to take off the shoe? He answers him, what's the best way to find what the root chalatz means? Go find another pasuk. It says, if you have a house that's leprous, you take out the stones. So here you have, take off the shoe. Well, the Gemara is now going to raise a whole bunch of psukim. Maybe it means to strengthen. Go get strong men, right? Strengthen yourselves with men for the army. If it means to strengthen, what would it mean by the shoe? Put the shoe on, strengthen the shoe rather than take the shoe off. So they say, when it says, it means take away from their house and bring them to the battlefield. In other words, they want to somehow connect the root ch.l.tz, even though it means to strengthen, it's to strengthen by removing. Okay, remove them from the house. Okay, I want to, before we go on with this, we're going to have a lot of back and forth, trying to prove different things about the root ch.l.tz. I want to introduce you to a book if you don't know it. It's called the BDB. It's not really called the BDB, but that's what everyone calls it. It's the Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament. It's the best dictionary. So if you're going to have a whole question of the root of the word ch.l.tz, this is the book you're going to use. Okay, it's called the BDB because of Brown, Driver, and Briggs are the authors, okay, not Jewish authors. It's a great dictionary. So if you look up ch.l.tz, you'll notice that there's two entries on ch.l.tz. The first one is ours, which says to draw off or out, withdraw. Okay, so it has to do with withdrawing. The second one is equip for war, okay, and strength, vigor, fortification. So you see that the word has two different meanings, okay, which are interesting because they're actually opposite meanings. Okay, so that's what really the Gemara is dealing with right here in our section. Okay, so the next pasuk is, we're going to have a whole bunch of them. Haktiv yechaltz ani ba'onyo, the poor person will be strengthened from his poverty. V'schar onyo yechatzu midino shel gehenom. What it means is the reward of his poverty is going to be that he's going to be saved from midina shel gehenom. I see someone saying, right, to rescue, right? Chalitza is what you call rescue. Okay, so it's right. The word actually, it's to rescue, to take you out of a situation, to save you from something else, right? So that's really what they're getting at in the Gemara. And the Malach Hashem will be dwelling there and will strengthen you. No, right? The reward of those who fear God will be that they will be redeemed from judgment of Gehenna. There's a pasuk in your Yeshayahu. There's actually a whole bunch of brachot there of things that will happen to you. Your bones will be strengthened. Okay, here there's no removal from anything. Certainly don't want your bones to be removed. He's saying out of all the whole list of things there, that's the most important one. Right? We all know how important health is. Right? So he says, this clearly means to strengthen your bones. There's no other way to understand it. To which they, mirimim yadayim, as they say, they put up their hands, okay, you got me. So how do we know it really doesn't mean to strengthen and put the shoe on? So now they try a different tactic. Forget about the root. Let's look at how, that's good, Gita, thank you. We say it in Birkat HaChodesh, every month before Rosh Chodesh, we say we should have Chayim Shel Chilutz Atzamot. That comes from here. Again, not from our Gemara, it comes from the pasuk. So now they say, okay, in mashmahachi. It could go that way, it could go that way. So how are we going to prove it? Tahacha, well, by us, let's look at the verse. What does it say? So they say like this. If it means to strengthen it and put it on, on his foot, not from his foot. From his foot sounds like take it, right? From up above his foot sounds like take it off his foot. And they say, no, that's not a good proof. They couldn't say biraglo. If they said biraglo, what would you have thought? Havamina biraglo im b'shokolo would sound like only on his foot and not on his thigh, and we on his his shins. We already learned if you have a stump there, right? Your leg's not amputated, so you can actually take it off from your shins, and this would indicate no, you couldn't. So that's why I couldn't say biraglo. To teach you dafilo b'shoko, and that's why it uses that language, not to teach us our halacha that it's to remove it. To which they say no, im ken lichtav rachmana b'me'al raglo. Now you don't really say this in Hebrew, but you would say b'me'al raglo, right? Put it on the section above your foot. My me'al raglo, shma mina mishlafi. So in the end, they say me'al raglo really sounds like from on your foot, meaning take it off, and that's how they get it. Now we have an encounter of Rabban Gamliel with a heretic. Usually the heretics are early Christians, and this clearly you'll see from the discussion between them sounds like an early Christian statement. This is right when they get into arguments over how to understand verses. The nation, you're the nation that your God did chalitza to you. Okay, basically, God chose a different nation now. He was with you, he's no longer with you anymore. So how do we know this? Dichtiv, it says in Hosea, which is interesting because Hosea is all about erastich lila olam, and you're my beloved, and all this kind of engagement between God and the Jewish people. It says bitzonam uvkaram yelchu, you go with your animals, levakesh Hashem, to go beseech God, v'lo yimtzau, and you won't find him. Why? Chalatz mehem, he did chalitza from them. Sounds like God did chalitza to you. You're no longer with God. He's not with you anymore. Hamar le'eshoteh, he said, idiot. Miktiv chalatz lahem, chalatz mehem ktiv. Again, we have this language. He says, chalatz from them. Okay, not chalatz to them. And that's what the man does to the woman is he does chalitza to her. But chalatz mehem, it's going to say, if the brothers did chalitza to the woman, would that be anything? No. It sounds like chalatz mehem is referring to they, right? It's the opposite side did the chalitza. And then that would mean that there's no meaning to that, right? If the man does chalitza to the woman, that doesn't count. Likewise, if here they're understanding the pasuk as if like God took the shoe off of them, or chalatz mehem, it's that direction. So because of that, he says clearly there's no chalitza that went on here. Okay, and if it was, it's a meaningless one. What it's basically saying is the Jews tried to do chalitza to God, but they didn't succeed because chalitza is not relevant for them to do to God. In other words, the woman is like Bnei Israel, right? They're always compared to the woman, and if the shoe was taken off of her, that wouldn't mean anything. Next section, and from here we're going to start this section that's going to lead into tomorrow's daf. But anpalia, chalitza psula. If you use a shoe, we're going to see that what this really means is a shoe, a soft shoe, which seems to be, we're going to distinguish between a soft shoe made of felt and a soft shoe made of leather. That I'm kind of giving away the end of it. But right now it just says anpalia, chalitza psula. Lemei anpalia lav min alhu. Is an anpalia not a shoe? And now we're going to get into two contradictory sugyas, none of them having to do with our topic, both mentioning an anpalia. One seems to say anpalia is a shoe. One seems to say it's not. Two totally different contexts. One is what can you go into the temple wearing or not wearing? And what about what can you wear on Yom Kippur? Two issues where shoes come up. Utna namid. Ein hatorem nichnas lo bepargo chafut v'lo b'anpalia. You might remember this from Masechet Shkalim. When you go to do the Truma Lishka, when you collect all the money that was collected, the person who goes in, we're worried that he's going to steal money. So you can't go in with a hem, like a double hem or some sort of hem where you can hide money in there. You can't go in with anpalia, these felt shoes that you could sneak, right? It's like when you go to security line and they say, take off your shoes. Shoes are a good place to hide things. And of course, you don't go in with shoes or sandals because that's a whole separate thing. That's from Yoshua and Moshe that we're told to take off their shoes. But what do you see here? Anpalia is on the side of we're suspecting you of stealing something. The other side is shoes, which is a different issue. So anpalia clearly is not shoes here. And that contradicts the source by Yom Kippur. You can't go out walking with a min'al, sandal, or anpalia. It's there listed with the shoes. Lomi bayit labayit, not from house to house, but lomi mita lemita, not even within the house from bed to bed. Amar Abaye, we're going to have two answers to this contradiction. Abaye says, Yom Kippur is a different issue. It's because it's cushioned. That's why you can't wear it, because it's very comfortable kind of shoe. To which Rava says, what are you talking about? Amar le Rava, if you're basically saying this isn't a shoe, but on Yom Kippur it's forbidden because it's cushioned and it's comfortable. What? You can't wear anything comfortable on your foot on Yom Kippur? Of course you can. We wear comfortable shoes. We just don't wear leather shoes. Now, there is a bit of a debate about whether you can wear comfortable shoes or not, but he basically says it's certainly not asur midoraita, to wear this. He put a cloth on his foot and he went out on Yom Kippur. It was comfortable for him. Comfort is not, even though it is, we're looking for enoi, but it's not that. He distinguishes between leather and cloth. Leather is a problem, cloth is not a problem. And leather is a shoe and cloth is not a shoe, basically. So the same thing by chalitza. Hachinami mistabra, and this also can be proven. Otherwise, you could have a contradiction with the Yom Kippur itself. Tanya. It says in the Braita, "Lo yitel adam b'kor dakisim." These are also some sort of slippers. B'toch beito. Avam etayelu b'ampilim b'toch beito. You can't use these kordisim, but you can use ampilim. We start to learn all these things about what kind of shoes they wore. El alav shmamina kama pilish shalor kama pilish habeged shmamina. It must be that's the distinction. What else would be the distinction? Obviously, they don't even know what all these shoes are, neither do we. But they're assuming that must be the distinction. We'll stop here. The next thing is a braita to support Rava, which we'll start in tomorrow's daf. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone.